Morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. The topic being demystifying the digitization of supply chains. We have an exciting and packed agenda ahead of us with a bunch of slides, and at the end of the session we'll spend some time on Q&A, so feel free to drop some questions in the chat. I've also received a bunch of questions before this session we'll go through, and then if we can't get to every question, we will definitely be following up and providing everyone with a recording as well. So without further ado, I will provide an overview of our panelists for today. We have Anders Nordahl, who spent a majority of his career at Kuehne and Nagel, working directly with customers in his role as VP of Customer Solutions. He also later joined DB Schenker as well, and then Mixmove, and he joins us as a supply chain solutions leader here at Orkestra. Second, we have Heiner Murmann, who spent most of his career at DB Schenker, both CEO and member of the board of management, working with a lot of global brands to help them achieve digital transformation, and later founded Orkestra back in 2018, a supply chain platform to help businesses digitize faster. We're also lucky to have Dr. Stefan Gstettner join us. He's a partner and director at Boston Consulting Group. He has his PhD in supply chain management from the University of Cologne, and a depth of experience working with clients on everything supply chain transformation, analytics, and he'll spend some time today talking a lot about his new concept around the bionic supply chain and what that means for supply chain leaders around the world. So I'll go through quickly what the agenda is for today, and then we'll dive right in. We'll cover the logistics landscape. What does it look like to date? How are supply chain teams and leaders operating? What does that look like? What are the key priorities for digitization, and why now's the time to start thinking about it and looking at how to implement across your organization? We'll talk about the ideal end state. So what does it look like in an organization to be fully digitized, and what are some of the key benefits for businesses in achieving full digitization? And then lastly, we'll provide you with a framework as to how to think about digitization, where to start, what are the problems and how to prioritize the problems areas, and then how to think about technical solutions, people solutions, and then also implementation, which comes with complexities in itself. And then lastly, we will end with a Q&A where you can ask our panelists directly some of the questions that are top of mind for you as you think about digitization. Great, so Heiner will lead us through the next couple slides. I will pass it over to you.
Thank you, Paula. I've been involved in global supply chains for more than 25 years, and I haven't seen anything what happened in the last 2 years at any of the years before. And supply chain topics, which were always sort of operational topics and hardly anyone really talked about it, but supply chain topics have literally become front page news. Events like the ship that was stuck in the Suez Canal was front page news, was news on TV and in all other news outlets. I mean, that had an enormous impact on the entire world, and everyone was just completely fascinated with that. And the effects were really disastrous for many companies, because the Suez Canal was such a choke point And as a result, many companies found themselves in this situation where they couldn't deliver to their customers and couldn't really keep their promises to their customers. Other topics that shippers faced in the last couple of years were extremely crazy fluctuating rates, which was caused by very, very sudden changes in demand and supply. And these changing rates were, in some cases, 20 times greater than what they'd paid only a year before. And many of the customers really facing, or the shippers were facing, a situation where their product was no longer viable because it was a low margin product, and the market wasn't able to take the increases. So crazy situations, crazy changes, and very, very, very difficult things to deal with. If we go to the next slide. So I don't think many experts believe that in the next couple of years, things will go back to normal. In fact, most experts believe that continuous disruption and shocks will continue. And this really makes the job of managing global supply chains very, very, very difficult. And especially for teams that don't have the proper tools to manage their business, like proper tools to understand what the status of the purchase orders are, what the status of the shipment is, and also where the inventories are sitting in order to give answers to their customers. So it's very, very difficult for teams to deal with these continuous disruptions without the proper tools. And that's why we believe it's critical for companies to digitalize their supply chains if they want to remain competitive. Okay. So without digitalization, companies really struggle with a whole range of topics, including lack of visibility. Teams are operating reactively, not proactively, because they don't have the real-time data to understand what's going on and to make timely contingencies. Many companies are facing a loss of revenue and uncontrollable costs. They cannot fulfill their customer orders on time, and in some cases lose the sale, or because of operational inefficiencies like detention and demurrage. I mean, that's a topic that's been a huge cost for many shippers in the last few years. Or a situation where they have to expedite the shipments, so they're facing uncontrollable costs that they simply can't pass on. And most importantly, they're unable to serve their customers. They cannot keep their customer promise because they simply do not know what is going on in their supply chains. Okay. I mean, that topic, especially in the last couple of years, has been really well recognized by many top CEOs around the world, and they've been very, very open to increasing the budgets for digitalization investments. But for many companies, money is not the only hurdle to overcome. Many are facing lack of access to data. They believe that sort of legacy systems are holding them back in terms of making some real improvements in terms of digitalization. They recognize that they don't have the skills that are necessary to drive their agendas forward. Some of them are struggling to find the right technologies. Are they going to simply try to improve the capability and functionality of their ERP, or would they implement a platform or sort of middleware layer on top that is effectively dealing with their legacy systems, struggling with complex implementations, and above all, siloed organizational structures? Okay.
Now we'll pass off to Stefan, who will talk a little bit, now that Heiner has mapped out, what the complexities are in today's supply chain. Stefan will take us through what is the end state of what digitization could potentially look like, and then we'll go through how to get there. So Stefan, I'll pass to you to go through the concept of the bionic supply chain.
Thank you. You are putting a big task on my shoulders to be looking into the future. But indeed, I think we would all agree that this is a longer journey, and then this journey definitely has many smaller steps to go, but then it is super important to at least directionally know where to go to, so that the little steps at least are not going completely in the wrong direction. So therefore, we tried to paint a picture a little bit where we believe companies should develop to. And then we were looking for the number one criteria to describe how do we measure, or how do we maybe describe with one, call it KPI, or with one indicator, whether the journey is moving in the right direction. And what we came up with is fueled by the insight that supply chain performance is actually made up of many very small, or many small decisions that people usually take in the supply chain every day. Of course, there are big decisions, network decisions, for example, where to put a plant. Some of the S&OP decisions are bigger, but I would argue the majority of the supply chain performance is created by people who are taking day-to-day decisions, whether to deliver today or tomorrow, whether to replenish a good, yes or no, whether to send from this warehouse or the other warehouse. So really small, but many decisions to be made. And that's why we said the ultimate resilient performance in the supply chain will depend on how much we can automate this decision making. Why is it needed to be automated? Because I think we all face the challenge that people are moving out of jobs. Let's say they are becoming older. There's not enough people who are qualified enough or willing to work to orchestrate complex supply chains. It is becoming more complicated. So I think the people that we have, we can be grateful that we have them. But then there's not a lot of chance that more people will come in. And with, let's say, older generations moving out, we will have a problem of having enough qualified people in the supply chain. So therefore, we do believe that we need to develop the muscle to automate decision-making in supply chains. And that's why we said the percentage of automated decision-making, and that is the bottom line here, gradually needs to increase. And then if we look at the journey, let's maybe forget the analog, that is, I don't know, maybe 50 years ago or so, but then what we called augmented analytics really is the start of where analytics came in. It can be something super simple like creating a inventory reorder point algorithm or something, and then dynamically upgrading inventory reorder points based on a relatively simple formula. So early, let's say, analytics, you can also become smart with analyzing the demand distribution function and so on, but it's quite siloed, it's quite atomic, let's say, in the end-to-end supply chain. And then I think companies have developed into what we might want to call digital, where the use cases became more complex. I would argue something like demand planning came to sight. There's so much to do with AI or fancy analytics and so on in demand planning. And then control towers certainly are part of the digital era. But why is that still not enough in our argumentation? Because most of the value-adding decision-making in end-to-end supply chains needs to be connected. There is no functional decision-making in supply chain because a chain, and that's the no-brainer of supply chain management, is connected. And therefore, we need to look at 2 or 3 areas at the same time always. We need to look at the demand forecast in conjunction with the current inventory level, in conjunction with what is happening in production, and in conjunction with in-transit goods. And those are, let's say, many data points, in this example, 4 data points that need to be looked at simultaneously, and then smart decisions need to be made out of this. As we are saying, cross-functional decision-making, ideally AI-powered, and that is what we call bionic. And maybe last word, why is it called bionic? Because we believe that it's, of course, not without people. It's with very specialized people who are designing those systems, who are running, let's say, platform operating models where the decision-making might be taken by analytics or AI, but we need a highly skilled set of people who are designing and operating those machine-led supply chains. Let's say it's not exactly lights out planning or autonomous supply chain. It's really sort of steered by humans, but executed by machines supply chains. This is what we suggest to be bionic. Now, the value and that we have on the next page, and for a consultant, it's sometimes easy to talk about big value promises, and I mean, don't take those numbers for granted or fixed, because it really depends on the starting position of every single company, and very mature companies will probably have different numbers than immature companies. However, I do think the beauty of this is that we can tap into so many value pools, and it's by far obviously not a cost reduction exercise. It's a very much a top line exercise. With that, you can become very smart in allocating products to markets, increasing margin, directly influencing the EBITDA. For example, obviously inventory is a value pool, not to talk about sustainability. So that there is so many value pools that I would argue it's not difficult to find the value case. And even better, on the left side, we are touching all planning or decision horizons in the supply chain, from really strategic planning, which is also supported by digital technologies, into the well-known IBP or S&OP area, then going down more to the sales and operations execution in a more short-term planning, and then to the real execution where the ships are on the water and the trucks are on the road and so on. And so all planning horizons, many value buckets, and we believe this is the dream situation to create value for companies, especially when we reconcile what Heiner explained, that the world obviously is very complex and will continue to stay complex. Now, we looked into the reality a little bit, and we did finalize a survey end of last year. So this is quite hot off the press. We will publish it officially a little bit later. So that is really a sneak preview. And I must say, this is only 2 data points out of a broader survey. I personally was surprised that we have the result that we see here, which essentially means the top 13% of those respondents, 200 supply chain executives, said that they are running connected use cases or use cases that are beyond the typical suspects of demand planning or inventory planning. Only 13%, I would say. And then 18% at least have deployed, and we geared it a little bit towards AI. And I don't want to make the impression that AI is the holy grail, and without AI you cannot uncover value. But so we geared it towards AI, and not many companies are using connected use cases with AI. And then the bottom 41 and 27%, they have the intent to use something, but they don't have it really in place. So I do agree, Heiner, that there's a high willingness to invest, but then this survey at least shows that there's also quite some white space to invest, because companies are not yet running connected use cases, which we are arguing are the ones that are really delivering the value. And then maybe to wrap it up and give it over to the continued discussion on the next page, that I think is a super expected picture. We asked the question, where exactly do you apply AI? Again, as a proxy, you can also say advanced analytics, but then the question was geared towards AI in your supply chain. And the by far winner, not surprisingly, is demand forecasting, which I would also argue is good to start with, because it's the consumer side where you should always start your supply chain thinking. But then you can also argue the question what to use this enhanced demand plan for, and is it really driving upstream supply chain improvements, yes or no? That sometimes remains unclear. But then it's also consequent that we see inventory planning or inventory strategy and supply planning as the next use cases. So that is already the right direction of development. However, we want to see those use cases more connected, and that doesn't seem to be the case now, which I think is a good news for all of us. So there is room to develop, and there is lots of room to enhance the performance of supply chains despite the complex environment. Anders, I don't know if I teed something up for you to continue. Laura, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Sorry, go. I was just going to say, Anders, a reminder to everyone, there is a chat functionality, so feel free to continue to ask questions, and then we'll go through those at the end. I know there was a huge deep dive into the conceptual space. If you have any questions for Stefan, feel free to ask, and I'll pass it over now to Anders, who will go through kind of a practical approach. How do you get there? What does that look like? So Anders, feel free to take it over.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate and really honored to be part of the discussion today. Well, of course, I think if you look at what was talked about in terms of the planning space, right? So you, of course, also have the raw material planning. You have the planning of production capacity. You have all kinds of things that adds on to this complexity, right? But if you look at the supply chain, the word supply chain kind of like thinks that everything is in a linear way. And I think we need to also be more cognizant that as complexities of supply chain evolves, we need to look at it in a multidimensional way. And that means we have, just from an execution point of view, we have a first mile, we have a global mile, we have a middle mile, we have last mile, and a final mile. And why am I bringing it into this layer? Is because when you think about an omni-channel operation, you have many final miles. And you have many middle miles. Okay, so understanding where is the cargo in the supply chain is of course then reliant that you understand this level of complexity. Okay, so I think when we're looking at the approach of digitalization is, and my argument in this case is that organizations and modern organizations today need to be a digital first organization. So what do I mean with digital first? It means that only with data can we make a proper assessment of what should I produce, at what quantity, at what margin, sorry, in what market, with what margin. And of course, when you're now looking at the AI capabilities where you can get tremendous rich external data, we have a very different way of how we can approach the whole digitalization. And of course, the end game have to be that this brings efficiencies, market differentiation, and of course, avoid any profit erosion in the supply chain. Meaning, what we decide to do is at most of the given time sold at what they call full margin. Okay. So I think in the sense of any organization looking to prioritize, it's of course then to identify within the individual organization in which use case this now improve. And then of course in terms of determining what this is, of course, then it also comes down to the ability to understand, right? So Heiner also teed it up in the sense of we have a lack of understanding. What do I mean with lack of understanding? We may have somebody who understands a really high-end mathematical part of it, so the data science part, but they typically are not domain experts. Now we have quite a few organizations that have domain expertise, but they had lacked the connectivity to the technical part, the digital part, the digital area. So I think it's important to demystify as much as possible. And of course, then to start focusing on, do I have all data? Do I have an understanding of what data each different node in your supply chain has on offer? And also, how do I normalize and synchronize all these data points so that an order which is packed in a carton packed on the pallet packed in a container, when you have an event on that container, on that vessel, because of course on the vessel you will have 20,000 containers, but it's all correctly inherited and displayed throughout your supply chain. Yeah, so those are quite important things, because the most expensive part of the supply chain is of course the final mile and the last mile. So if we don't get it right up to that point, and we have to do this multiple times, or multiple, let's say, stock transfer orders, or move freight between different facilities and locations, this is where the cost really comes into play. So whilst we want to avoid, we want to reduce the cost in the supply chain, this is probably the easiest way to do that is to have what we call cost avoidance. So avoid having to do these unplanned and unscheduled activities. The next one, Paula. So of course we're now looking at an environment where, let me just check if there was a question here, or did that disappear? I can't see it. Okay, so when we're looking at the rate levels, okay, so I've been in supply chain now for 32 years. My first booking from Shanghai was a feeder port to Hong Kong, so it's been a while ago. But rate has always been a situation, something we always talked about, right? And back in the early days, we had CAF and BAF, which is something which is normally not so much discussed today. So these are currency adjustments and bunker adjustments and what have you, okay? We still today have war surcharges, we have all kinds of other surcharges. And the industry, of course, is getting now even more creative, because the shipping lines have, of course, seen a massive erosion of the profits that they had in the last couple of years. And that also falls down to the freight forwarders, right? Because they have, of course, been able to negotiate fairly good rates, and of course are part of you know, taking to a certain degree, you know, a little bit careful, baby, but taking also a little bit advantage of this situation. So what we typically have seen throughout the history is that when the disruptions happens, the easiest way, of course, is to take capacity out. The second part is instill what we call slow sailing, and now we're seeing also super slow sailing. That means fuel has gone up, rates have come down. Looking at the 2018 bunker cost versus the cost today, it's a very, very thin margin that these operators are working on. And you don't have to go more than 4 or 5 years back, and 75 to 80% schedule accuracy was quite accepted, right? Today, we are looking at an average sailing schedule accuracy of 35%. So what does that mean for you in your supply chain, right? It, of course, has a huge impact on the financial, as well as your commitment as a brand operator to deliver on promise, okay? So, of course, the way then to go forward is to ensure that, number one, your orders are properly digitized. You do have a capability to operate that in a digitized way, and to the level of granularity where all participants can play. And of course, then also work with providers that have the technical capability, not only have a technology in-house for their own internal use, but a technology that is then also available for collaborative interactions between the booking party and the manufacturers, as well as the consignee and all the delivery points, okay? So those are the low-hanging fruits that we can look into there. And of course, we also have to then be very cautious about if you can't do it in-house, there are quite a lot of opportunities to then invest in control tower capabilities, okay? Now, I think the other part is, of course, and one of the participants on this call asked, is the industry ready for our autonomous trucks, and our warehouses able to work with those, and how will they be managed? So I think we're getting to a point now where IoT devices with dongles and triangulation technologies have an incredible accuracy. We can have dongles and sensors on the workers, on the forklift trucks, and any participant in a facility can actually be visualized in a digital space with very, very high level of accuracy. So I think we are getting very close now to have a pretty autonomous operation, okay? Is it going to be 100%? No, but this comes also down to the way you're looking at your products how it is packaged. And of course, you then have to segregate in dedicated spaces inside these facilities. And I tend to refer to these as a shop floor. Okay, so similar to when you go to a grocery store to buy milk, you don't find it in the section where they don't have refrigeration, right? So you will of course have to look at the shop floor organization of your warehouse, and products have to be then correctly facilitated so that the automation can take place. Is it cheap? No, it's not cheap. We're talking $200 million in certain situations to have a fully automated environment. But does it bring benefits? Yes, it does. But again, if you don't have the data systems that can take advantage of those investments, you of course have to then look at it in the long-term space for return on capital invested. Next one. So I think the margin pressure is of course massive right now. We have incredible increase in energy costs. So anything related to running these warehouses, specifically if you have temperature cargo, is massively expensive. There's apparently now we're seeing an easier demand on raw materials, so that is starting to normalize. Rates are still high. But all of these things, when you're now looking at forces on the industry, so we typically refer to these as gray swan events and black swan events. So a typical gray swan event would be the Suez Canal blockage, right? A black swan event is typically a COVID situation where everything locks down. And of course, when you're looking at supply chains, everything in supply chain is all working in a harmony. And the moment you have disharmony in the supply chain, and we're talking global supply chain, we're talking about disruption in number of equipments available at any given point, the load utilization and what have you. The history that I've been watching for the last 20 years in that specific space talks about the 6 to 7 year time for recovery, for everything to start normalizing. And this will only work if we come back to a certain level of global stability. And that talks about all areas of stability, okay? So we have to be very quite cautious about this one, because during COVID time, organizations moved from a just-in-time operation to a just-in-case. And with just-in-case means you're building up inventory because you don't know if tomorrow I'm going to get the freight that I ordered, the products that I needed for my production. But of course, now in certain areas, we've seen customers where the demand for their products have dropped by 30%. So what will happen in this scenario is that you'll just stop ordering. And when you stop ordering, that all creates a bullwhip effect against all other participants in your supply chain. So I think we have to be quite cautious about understanding what's going on and then react with the right types of measures and tools when we see these things happening. Okay. Next one. Polar, for whatever reason, I cannot see the slide. I'm not sure if I'm the only one.
Mine is black too.
Let me just restart. Give me one moment.
A nice Microsoft Teams glitch. and they have many.
Well, it's quite okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So of course, I mean, we already before COVID, we had a lot of discussions in the industry about the challenge with China, right? And we saw this already because, I mean, if you look at the China from the beginning, only really when the CEPA agreement came into place in 2003 is when the big shift for China manufacturing happened, okay? And at that point, China was still learning how to do things, but they picked up very, very fast. But as we are now going through the geopolitical situations we are going through, of course, a lot of companies have said, look, we need to have a China +1. And in certain situations, they start even talking about, well, let's source from friendly nations. Okay, so what is a friendly nation? Well, it's a nation where stability is to a certain degree predictable, of course, but also where supplies can be produced at a fairly affordable rate. Because what we've seen in the supply chains is that manufacturing will, in most scenarios, be happening in an affordable location. So as we've seen now, we have a shift to Vietnam, we have a shift to Philippines, we have a shift to Indonesia, Thailand, and India. What is, of course, still a challenge is that whilst we do I call it now assembly in these places, the raw materials are still coming, in most cases, actually from China. And of course, then we also have to look at the infrastructure. So of course, in India, infrastructure, whilst domestically they think it's not a big issue, it is an issue because it comes down to a lot of different things. Okay, and also the efficiency in ports and rails, of course, have to be considered. Vietnam has spent tremendous amount of money on investing in infrastructure. But all of these things have to be seen in a lens where we can predict, and the similar kind of challenges you will also have in places like Indonesia as well as in the Philippines. Thailand has been quite fortunate in the sense that most of their manufacturing happens not too far away from the ports in Bangkok. So within 2-3 hours drive, you find predominantly most of the operators. And you don't have to go more than 10 years back. There was more than 8,000 Japanese companies, as an example, manufacturing in Japan. So sorry, in Vietnam. So it's quite a mature space. And I think in terms of ability to serve and ability to produce high quality products, I think these countries are now picking up very, very fast. And also understand what type of resilience they need to have, and also digital capabilities to onboard and integrate new suppliers. And I think this is probably the biggest challenge with these markets. Typically, these vendors and manufacturers, they don't really understand why technology is needed. Why does it need to be shown? Why do I need to give you a full visibility to what's happening on my production floor? And I think this is an area where these countries and these manufacturers need to get an understanding of what is needed in a modern, or in basically manufacturing 4.0. And that comes down to IoT devices, comes down to all kinds of technology that can be deployed to ensure that the visibility is there. And of course, also abilities for proper labeling of products, preferably with QR codes and what we call digital twin on carton labels. Those are all elements that will drive a connected network, if I may so, and of course contribute to a fully autonomous and also a fully bionic supply chain. Next one.
Great. Thank you, Anders. I'll let you and Heiner also take this slide. What they'll do now is now that we've gone through the problem landscape, both from a standpoint of what is the conceptual future look like for a fully digitized supply chain, and what are potential paths to digitization, both Heiner and Anders will go through a deep dive on what does that look like from a technical, people, and then implementation standpoint. So I'll pass it off to you both.
Mm-hmm.
Anders, give it a shot first.
Okay, well, having been involved in building real-time visibility solutions for 2 decades already, if not over almost 25 years, actually 25 years already, if I look back. I deploy technology that new startups today is saying, oh, this is brand new, we just invented it. And like, oh, it's been around for some time, okay? So I think we have to be quite cautious when we talk about disruptive technology, because a lot of these technologies, and we saw blockchain come and go, and we have to see the technology in the sense that, is it a technology looking for a problem, or is it a problem that can be solved with technology? So I think the real-time visibility is, of course, highly important. We are getting to a point where containers are getting IoT tracking. That is nice. We now know where is the container, but we don't necessarily know what is in the container, which is equally important. So for those kind of capabilities, we need, of course, a proper technology that can actually understand what has been put in a carton and what at what pack size, and of course what is then being shipped. Yeah, so purchase order management solutions are highly important in that space. We have also proper understanding of demand planning, and of course the whole KPI and what is a good KPI, or what triggers a KPI exception, what resets a KPI exception. How do we understand the severity and the impact it has on your supply chain? Understanding is also a very important part. And we do have, of course, capabilities of deploying technologies like RPA, so these robotic process automations, which tries to create an organic interface between systems and technologies. I kind of like say that RPA is a stopgap solution. I think we need to fix technologies so that they are real-time API capable. We need to come to a conclusion that to make an EDI connectivity between parties and participants should happen in the week and not over 2-3 months. Yeah, so the cost of deploying of connected deployment needs to massively change. And of course, digital twin is a huge opportunity for organizations to take a rearview mirror and look at, well, what happened, what is going on, but then also in real time be able to look at the correlation between my operational data with external data sources. Yeah. Maybe I can also quickly talk about the people solutions. So we have a lot of really smart people that understand, let's say, a certain part of the problem, but to also have generalists in the organization, I think that's highly important. And I think the merger between data scientists and, I wouldn't call them necessarily old timers in a bad way, but really deep domain knowledge people as a team, as a collaborative team, is highly important to have that leadership capability to then drive and orchestrate all these things that need to happen and also then to a certain degree, you can say even call it engineering capability to drive that process. And I think in terms of the implementation is to make it in bites, meaning don't make it into a 1 year sprint, because you will not see the end and you won't see incremental improvements. And only when you deliver the final product, you realize, oh, we missed something. So always put the project into smaller parts, breaking up to a point where we can continuously see success. We can continuously celebrate that it's working. And you can always check back and identify that what we agree to do is working, and at budget, and potentially as you're learning, you can actually make it then quicker and faster as you move forward. So maybe Heiner, you can take your stab at it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Anders. Our approach has been always to deliver smaller projects within months rather than sort of embarking on a multi-year engagement, which is hard to sort of monitor return and making sure that our customers are actually realizing the improvements that they set out to improve. Maybe we go to the next slide, Paula, and then I sort of bring it up to a slightly higher level again, and then we can take questions to get a good time. So as we said early on, many of us have worked in global logistics for many years and have had thousands of customer interactions. And the common sort of thread, and this is also why we've created and launched Orkestra, was that in our experience, the vast majority of the global shippers sort of hired people in global functions, but didn't give them the tools to be really successful. And we went on so many QBRs where we reported our own performance. Of course, we were as accurate as we possibly could be, but in the end, the data was slanted in our favor. So there was never an objective sort of third-party measurement of what our performance was. And I found that really surprising. And as a result, we created Orkestra really to help shippers to put their teams in a position where they can manage their supply chains effectively. They could do more than just sort of provide a procurement function. They could actually proactively manage their supply chain, manage their logistics, manage the ecosystem, and manage the service providers to really drive performance that they wanted to achieve. And as Anders said, and it's really important to recognize that. Early on, we started out with small projects. We started even on the consulting side because the technology was in its infancy, and we were convinced that the initial sort of big improvement areas was around consulting, understanding supply chains, and understand and document where the sort of opportunities and pools were for improvements. And then we've deployed the technology over the last few years, and we've had really good results to really put people in a position where they had amazing visibility, but they also had the digital tools to execute properly and also leverage their ecosystem and leverage their partners more effectively, from carriers to freight forwarders to truckers, to really be in a position where they manage the ecosystem effectively. And again, start with smaller projects, start with a sprint methodology in mind, and make sure that you get pretty clear and quantifiable benefits. And our motto is really is to ship smarter and not harder. And with that, Paula, let's open it up to some questions.
Yeah, so maybe we can take one question here. Paula, you want to read out the question?
Yeah, so we had a few that came in before, so I'll start with those. The first one being, can you please explain the difference between a business intelligence software and a visibility software?
Okay, so I can talk about that one. So a visibility solution will take static data and display it in a smart way. Okay. But once you start working with data science, is also then to look at, well, I'm looking at this data and I'm looking at patterns and I'm looking at predicting. Then, of course, you're now getting to an enriched version of looking at the data. So I think that's the simple way of explaining the difference here.
Great. I will.
Stefan, any comment from you, Stefan, on this one?
No, I think no.
Okay.
Enrichment of your good answer.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. So Kimberly asked, will we get a copy of this presentation? You'll get a copy and recording of this session afterwards, and you can always reach out to us and we can set up a separate session to go deeper. So yes to that answer. And then we have a question from Matt. How critical do you see digitalization in managing supply chain fragility and visibility? For example, supplier financial fragility, parts availability throughout deep tiers of a supply chain network?
Oh, I think it is highly important. I think I come back to what I mentioned before, being a digital first organization. Without data, I don't know, how can you successfully manage all and everything in the correct way? It's really hard. Yeah, so tools that gives you that capability is absolutely important moving forward. And tools like this, a couple of decades ago was very hard to get by, and you needed some really high-level data scientists to work on it. But today there are solutions that solve all of these problems that we have in the supply chain.
It's a longer journey, Anders, and to go into a third level of suppliers and sort of having an early alarm system and so on. It's quite a significant undertaking that requires not just a technical solution that is out there, but also the people with the framework and the patience to put all that together.
Yeah.
Stefan, anything to add?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So what I'm telling our clients mostly is the multi-tier upstream collaboration really is far less a technical problem than a business problem in the sense of what's in it for all the partners upstream. Huh? I mean, the relationships between a shipper and their suppliers, multi-tier, have developed over time, sometimes favorably, sometimes not. There's sometimes dependency, sometimes the suppliers are far bigger for a certain category than their customers, and so complex relationships. And there's not one size fits all solution to everybody wants to collaborate with everybody and share data and be on one platform. That's definitely not the case. Huh? So there are, I mean, the platform, I think, is the least complicated solution, but then getting the business agreements in place, getting compliance in place, also the rigidity that the suppliers actually work in the platform and share data, and then that the shippers share data, and so on. So many business problems to overcome that I would say technology-wise, it's under control, but all the rest is quite a lot of work.
Great, thank you. We have another question from Barry. Have you seen examples of, or do you believe that agile governance and agile project management can accelerate digitalization and cross-functional decision-making in an organization's supply chain function?
Stefan, do you want to start and we can add some perspective here?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I should start making a list with buzzwords that are sort of difficult to understand, and maybe agile would even be on it. And I don't want to discredit the word, but what I sometimes find also in our clients, and I think we are also sometimes guilty of that, is that we use agile for everything and are not specific enough what exactly we mean with agile. But when we break it down to the true agile ways of working with, let's say, a product owner with goods sort of schedule, so bi-weekly sprints, a proper backlog of work with morning stand-ups and all the ceremonies that, let's say, that are with agile, and then with the ultimate goal to have a product owner who decides is it serving my purpose, yes or no, and then having cross-functional teams with engineers, data scientists, subject matter experts, and so on in the agile team. So, and that is only a little part of what agile really is. If that is all in place, I think it's a game changer in implementing things like we are discussing here. And I do think the good old waterfall project that sometimes, unfortunately, maybe is even needed or that exists. So the S/4HANA implementation that takes 3 or 4 years will not entirely go away. But for many parts that we are discussing here, agile is the implementation method to take. And I would even argue agile can even be, let's say, replacing some of the historical line constructs or line organizations because it's so effective, and it really boils you down to keeping track of what is adding value and where should we really work on and invest, and then tracking progress of results in a much faster pace than in, let's say, historical waterfall projects.
I fully agree with you, Stefan. Sort of our own experience here at Orkestra was that initially, our initial start, and Anders, you remember that our initial start was kind of rough, but it wasn't rough necessarily because there's something wrong with the agile methodology, but it was rough because we didn't have, and Stefan, you mentioned it, we didn't have the appropriate players in place to really play properly. We didn't have a strong product owner. We hadn't properly defined what we wanted to achieve. But once we had all these sort of capabilities in place, it became, and this is what our status now. It's a very natural way of working. It's almost like a soccer team or a football team is playing football, not like a bunch of 5-year-olds that are all running behind the same ball, but in a very modern way where the teams are set up properly and to kick the balls back and forth and score goals every 2 weeks. So it's really a very good way, but it requires the right players on the field to be successful. You know.
Great. Conscious of time, so we have 2 more questions, one from Jennifer and one we'll wrap up from Carl. So if we could keep the answers short and sweet, that would be great. Question from Jennifer being, what is the role that an ERP should play in digitalization?
So very short, it should be reduced to the core. So it should be a lean transactional system to the core, and then the intelligence sits on top of it.
Yeah, I
fully agree.
Totally agree.
Okay.
Great. And then question from Carl. Great presentation. Thank you. Is it understandable that the focus of your work is on transport related issues? In the food business, we have a lot of interest in integrating growing practices, labor policies, certification, and then also looking at climate impacts. Can you discuss?
Stefan, do you want to start, and then we can give our perspective?
Yeah, probably hard for 1 minute. Very good question. So I absolutely see that there's lots of more dimensions to be juggled. And in food, or I personally work quite a lot in fashion, where I see similar challenges. We don't only want to have transparency on our upstream supply chain, but especially traceability. Increasingly, companies are issuing laws that are saying, I exactly want to know where the cotton is coming from that is in the t-shirt, otherwise you are not allowed to sell it in our market, and so on. So all these practices, labor practices, are so critical. I think there is a risk that the solution landscape will be scattering along the same dimension. So keeping control over the upstream supply chain on these kinds of questions, where does the cotton come from, and keeping control on a transactional basis, purchase order management and so on, runs the risk of being captured in 2 different application areas, or even with 2 different solutions, which is not a good idea because it's addressing the same players in the upstream supply chain. On the other hand, the solutions tend to become quite complicated when you want to integrate everything into one. And there are, by the way, also not so many that are existing that can integrate it. So it's a bit of a dilemma. I think, Carl, you are 100% right. It should be integrated. It must be. From my point of view, the solution is not yet developed 100% to accomplish this.
Yeah, Stefan, we haven't spent much time on this topic either directly, because we see from our perspective, we can help more on the transport and logistics side initially in regard to supply chain, and then the whole topic about inventory optimization, both from a raw material perspective, but also from a sort of final mile perspective, to make sure that our customers are able to meet their customer commitments as well as they possibly can. Anything to add, Anders?
No, I think when it comes to compliance, I mean, this is a huge area and not to be underestimated. You can, of course, have simple tools where I just need to make sure that this document is correctly attached to the file, but it doesn't check on the content. So it goes back to deploying the right type of technologies, being RPAs with optical character recognition technologies. With proper AI that can actually do auto correction, that will be a starting point. And you see now today we have capabilities that far reaches what we have had in the past. So there are capabilities in that space. And to Stefan's point, to where was my products and produce coming from? There are technologies that are available so that you can overlay weather-related information onto your supply chain. And that will, of course, also help you to understand the yield of the crop, all kinds of stuff that comes with it. And also what's also available in the supply chains of today is IoT trackable carts that are being used for the harvesting and going through the pack houses. And Heiner and I, we looked at a few country interesting projects like this a couple of years back. And there's quite some sophisticated capabilities out there, including all the way down to QR codes that can be applied to the fruits itself if you have a fruit kind of supply chain.
Great. Thank you all for providing that context. So I want to say a big thank you to all the participants. We are at time. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you to our amazing panelists for walking us through the content. As I said earlier, you will receive a recording of this session. You will receive a presentation. And again, feel free to reach out to us if you have questions. We can go a lot deeper on your supply chain challenges and how Orkestra can potentially help you and provide recommendations there. So thank you, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you, Paula. And thank you,
Thank you very much,
Stefan
Paula.
and Anders. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.